Lenten journey. Some of you may be saying, Lent, really? I thought we were a happy church. For some of you, Lent means taking on. For others, it means putting away. It's a time of intense introspection, generally, repentance, confession, examination. Anything else from the community about Lent? Anybody? Prayer and fasting. Giving alms. Reminder of our mortality. Letting go. Renewal and sacrifice. What's that? Commitment? Yeah, all of those. I think all of those things are really wrapped up right in this whole experience of Lent, and we all experience Lent differently. For me, and for Gordon, right, in our previous traditions of being Missouri Synod Lutheran, we had this one song that was the favorite song of the Lenten season. And it was a time of year when good Lutherans looked incredibly pious. We had pain-filled faces, especially as we sang some of these songs, and the hymns sounded more like funeral dirges than normally they would. And I can still sing this one by memory, at least one of my favorite Lenten hymns, right from the hymnal. And at Grace Lutheran, where I was called to be the campus and youth pastor, the senior minister decided we would do a Lenten series based on this particular hymn. And of course, this is the verse that I was given. Can you play a little bit of the melody, Charlie? It's too high. And I would he devote that sacred head for such a worm as I. So that was the particular verse I was given to preach on. Still makes me shudder and brings back, some pretty intense emotions. So for many years, and as I found my way to the altar, as I've shared, right, at a Billy Graham crusade at 13 years old in Chicago at Erie Crown Theater, my motivation going forward at that Billy Graham altar call was simply to deal with the fact that I felt like a worm and didn't quite know it yet. My same-sex attraction was something that needed to be crucified, and it was my thorn in the flesh, according to my youth group leader. That was the thorn, and so I went forward to be delivered from my sin and from my thorn. But of course, many years later in my seminary years, I finally understood the truth of the gospel, and I came to this conclusion. I wasn't created in your image of God, but I was created in the image of God and not someone else's image of God. And God has made all of us straight and queer, otherly abled, black and white and brown, just as we are beautiful. Why? Because our God is a God of diversity. And our God is a God of creativity and differences. So for Lent, I say, let's keep calm and live Lent. And I'm going to try to banish that song from my brain now. I also want to be clear today, especially for those of you who are new to our community, who have been around our community for some time. We do not espouse that type of fear-mongering theology that ancient hymn gives us. At least I don't, and it's okay if you do, but I would hope that you would just leave that outside the doors and come in. I choose to have really a different narrative around the season of Lent, a different narrative around the death, the life, and the resurrection of Christ. I don't believe any of us are worms. You and I were not created sinful. We do not teach what I would call this false doctrine of original sin, a theology of oppression that says that humans are sinful from the moment of conception in our mother's wombs. The concept of original sin was explained in depth by St. Augustine and formalized as a part of the Roman Catholic doctrine by the Councils of Trent in, anybody know what century? Deborah? You're close. 16th century. I thought I'd ask a Presbyterian preacher, right? Yeah. But why? Why did that become such an important doctrine? And then the Protestant churches continued that teaching of original sin? Maybe so we could kind of point the finger at each other and we could say, you're born in sin. You're a sinner. Are we born good? Are we born bad? So when God finished creating, in that beautiful, incredible, magical story of Genesis 1 and 2, when evolution and creation was put into motion, God said it was good. It emerged as good. In fact, we are told that the Creator stepped back, look at what He had made or she had made. The sky, the cloud, the moons, the stars, the animals, the plants, the sea creatures, and the human. And God said, this is very, very, very good, all together as one beautiful creation. This is one of my favorite quotes from Rumi, an ancient Middle Eastern writer, who says, we are born of love, love is our mother. And if we believe God is love, we are born of God, and God is our mother and our father. So Lent this year is going to be full of emotions. We're going to get in touch with our emotions. Honestly, this is going to be a bit challenging for me because I've been told that I'm somewhat touch adverse and that I keep my emotions close to my vest. And part of that because I spent many years in the social work field. Pastor Susan and I sat in the office for quite a bit of time before she left for Durban, South Africa, considering what Spirit may call us to for Lent. And as you know, the Lenten journey is the Old English, what means to lengthen, and it's the springtime, and it's March. And it's also Latin for, and if you can say that, please do, it's Latin for 40 days. So it's this 40-day lengthened period in faith communities when we expect spring, and we expect resurrection, and we expect new life. It's a time of renewal. It's a time of reflection. It's a time of being refreshed. And I think of Lent as a time back when I lived in the Midwest, and all those perennials began to poke their heads from the soil through sometimes the snow. And we were planting our annuals. So for 40 days, we will find some fresh springtime meaning in this ancient practice of Lent. And during these 40 days, we're going to talk a lot about emotions. And we will ask ourselves, what is our emotional IQ? And we will ask, what emotions did Jesus have during these 40 days as he journeyed toward his arrest and his trial, his execution, and toward his coming alive and resurrection? So for today, we keep calm and we live Lent. Again, I have to say I'm not the best person to talk about emotions, simply because I'm generally pretty happy. I grew up in a good Deep South family in Boonville, Mississippi, that was not only Deep South, but also had proper British values. And we kind of know how the Brits are. You don't show your emotions. And in my family system, we were always trying to make Daddy happy and not do anything that would upset or provoke him or make him angry, unhealthy as that may be. And also in a good Southern tradition, we were taught to say to somebody we didn't like that was departing from a room or from a conversation, "Oh dear, bless your little hot." Which really means we're glad you're leaving, you blankety blankety blank. If I ever say that to you, I apologize. So today our theme, testing our emotional IQ, is based on Jesus' experience in the garden read for us. Yes, the Message translation, just before Jesus was arrested. So Jesus is in the garden. He's struggling with courage and avoidance, and Jesus does indeed accept his future. Jesus is kneeling, and in great agony, Jesus prays, "Abba, Daddy, Father, if you are willing, take this cup of suffering away, but do what you want, not what I want. And then the story in the prayer garden goes on and says, Jesus being full of pain, Jesus prayed even harder. His sweat was like drops of blood falling to the ground. And we are told when Jesus finished praying, he went back to his followers and found them what? Sleeping. It says because of their sadness in one of the translations. And Jesus says to them, why are you sleeping? Get up and pray for strength against temptation. Now, that is full of emotion. How would you describe Jesus' emotional state at that point? Any thoughts? Fear? Disappointed? Maybe a bit of a panic attack? An anxiety attack? I think of MLK before he was shot. He knew he was about to be executed by an assassin. There was something intuitive. I think Jesus knew the cards had been played. Because Jesus was calling religious and political leaders out on their stuff. And when you shake up the religious status quo, when you speak the truth about poverty, when you speak the truth about the oppression of women, when you speak the truth about sharing resources with those who don't have enough, when you talk about equity and equality, you know you're not going to be popular among those who hold the power and seek to maintain that power in their systems and to keep that system of oppression in its place. And so I believe Jesus, yes, was experiencing fear and trepidation, hesitation, anxiety. Jesus was human and he had that full range of human emotions. And I think Jesus would probably identify with this, and you may identify too. Some days I feel 1,000 different emotions all at once. Other days, I'm nothing but numb. I'm tired of this roller coaster masquerading as my life. Stop the ride. I want to get off. So Jesus says, God, is there any way that I can be spared from the inevitable? Is there any way, God, I can avoid the inevitable? You know, it sounds like our human questions when you hear the word, oh, you've got cancer, or you hear the word of some sort of debilitating illness, or a loss of home, or a loss of job, or a family member, or a friend. Isn't there a way I can get off this roller coaster, stop the ride? And can't things just go back to normal? But Jesus, in so many instances, chooses a third way. We've been talking a lot about the third way in our leadership at First Church. He chooses the way of love and sacrifice and letting go and saying yes. Bell Hooks says this: you must have courage to love. You have to have a profound will to do what is right to love, and it does not come easy. I think that's why Jesus sweat drops of blood. This was not coming easy for him, as life often doesn't come easy. So here's what I hear Jesus praying in the garden, surrounded by sleepy and unaware friends. He hears the hooves of the horses, right, carrying his accusers. And he says, Yahweh, give me courage, give me love for those who hate me and my message of inclusion. I think that's probably a message translation from James Pennington for what Jesus was thinking and saying in that moment. Some scholars think that Jesus was above these kind of human feelings of distress and fear and agitation and anxiety and grief. They think that Jesus should have been more Socratic and accepted his coming death beautifully and easily. Easy for them to say. We are told in that narrative from the Gospel of Mark around this pivotal moment in Jesus' life that he literally throws himself on the ground and prays for a way out. Been there, done that. And I must admit, Jesus could have avoided all of this right? In some fashion. He could have hightailed it out of the garden and crossed one or the other seas to another country to escape what might happen. He could have been a refugee fleeing. Whatever outcome was certainly on its way. And I have to admit, I've been working on my conflict avoidant behavior too, just like I think Jesus was working on his conflict avoidant behavior. Because there are things in conversations and situations I'd rather avoid, and that's when I say, Pastor Susan, take this cup from me. Here you go. Please? No problem. I cannot even imagine the level of human emotions that Jesus was going through. For me, that's really the heart of the Gethsemane story. That's the heart of the story in the beauty and the challenges of all of the gardens of life that we experience. So what about those sleeping disciples? Couldn't they simply stay awake to support their friend Jesus? I think there's some sort of story for us. We, the church, modern-day disciples, people of faith, we are so aware of the enormous and indescribable suffering that surrounds us. And some of us ourselves are suffering. And we can easily fall asleep when all this tragedy surrounds our lives. But we need to be awake. We need to be awoke. Because when Jesus is suffering within the bodies of those who are hungry and homeless and crossing our borders, it's easy for us to fall asleep. But Jesus, like Jesus, we need the courage to face the challenges and the joys ahead. Jesus displayed avoidance and fear, and yet lived into his hope and love. So I love this quote from Eleanor Roosevelt. I love Eleanor Roosevelt. She says, "You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you really stop to look fear in the face." That's what Jesus was doing in the garden. Fear has two meanings. Either forget everything and run, or face everything and rise. The choice is yours. It is our choice how we respond, is it not? We're told that over and over and over again. I think of Michelle Obama in many difficult situations, and this popular phrase, our motto is, when they go low, we go high. In the face of inequities that would seek to shut Jesus out and shut Jesus down, Jesus kept on keeping on, and Jesus would take the high road rather than the low road. And I do believe that's part of the reason that Jesus was able to find courage in the face of those feelings of avoidance and fear. He knew that God was with him. He knew that God was with him despite the fact that his community periodically would fall asleep at the wheel. He ultimately realized he had an amazing group of people backing him up, which is part of what I'm grateful for you. To Joshua, the forerunner to Jesus, God said, "Do not be afraid, do not be discouraged, for the Lord your God will be with you wherever you go." There is a lot to be afraid of these days. God knew the Old Testament Joshua, the New Testament Jesus, and that we're afraid. For Joshua, his enemies were in possession of the land, oppressing. They were giants. They had big personalities. They were strong, narcissistic people. Make your own connections. God called Joshua to take back the land from the oppressor and speaks those powerful words to his oppressors. Courage. The original definition of courage, when it first came into the English language, it's from the Latin word cor, meaning heart. And the original definition was to tell the story of who you are with your whole heart. I love the way that Carson framed that quote for us this morning. Basically, courage is what? Love. And love is courage. And courage is love in action. Courage is love in action. So Lent, we journey with Jesus. We find courage through his incredible examples. We're reminded that God is always with us in whatever garden we may find ourselves in, whether we are sweating water or blood. No matter what the message and story is to us, that God is by our side and God is in us. And we will at times shrink away and we will fall flat on our face. We will find ourselves saying, let this cup pass from me. I don't want to go through this. I don't want to deal with this. But together, as community, we find the courage to walk boldly and lovingly in solidarity. So the final words I'd like to share with you: having a soft heart in a cruel world is courage, not weakness. So think about that. Having a soft heart in a cruel world is courage, not weakness. So my prayer during this Lenten season, as we dig deep into the emotions and the life and the journey of Jesus, and we dig deep into our own emotions and the life that we live, that we would find our hearts softened in this world that right now seems incredibly cruel. And that we would see our soft hearts as a beautiful gift of courage and not of weakness.